Before we start, could you just say where you're from and what your situation with written policies is? Let's start there.
Oh, Chewy.
Drew Martin with Tripolo County Community TV.
I have to ask my boss.
So you don't know if you have written policies or not?
You'd have to ask.
I know where you're at
I
already.
just work there, so.
You just work there, but you don't know if you have written policies.
not
Okay.
100%.
Well, if you don't know, then you don't know if you need to enforce anything, so.
Yeah, okay, so we know where you're at.
I'm Dave Lemke from Deerfield, Wisconsin, and I'm the commission chairman, and we have some basic policies, and we enforce them.
You're a PEG, right?
We're a combination.
Yeah.
We're everything.
Yeah. And Tripolo, you're kind of a PEG too, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. And,
This is Fred Fry, he's with
I talked to you on the phone.
yeah, hi. Yeah, oh, I remember that
They're just
conversation.
asking us
Yeah,
where we're
okay.
from and if we have policies and that would be.
Okay. Back there?
Dale Nineholtz from Dodgeville, and we do have some policies. They should be revisited. They're not necessarily updated or comprehensive for a lot of things, but we have some.
Okay, and you're also a PEG. All right. And each of you have one channel or two? You have two?
Board and a regular channel.
Okay. And you're two channels and one, right? Okay. Alan.
I can forget my name. JTV, Janesville. The city has two channels. One is the school district. We were not really involved with that at all. But we are a PEG channel because we do represent also University of Wisconsin, Rock County. We have a volunteer there that we work closely with, and we help with a couple of shoots there, do the commencement, but as for regarding policies, I'm actually redoing policy right now because we had an issue with a volunteer bringing in some programming that was very, very left,
Okay.
extremely left.
Okay.
And we're Paul Ryan votes in our building, and he's up the hill, so we don't want anybody to think we're biased one way or another. So in rules of use, we've been redoing them recently, and actually we don't have a cable board. We have work underneath the library board, so we're actually going to be going over our rules of use on Tuesday.
Ah.
So I've
Okay.
revamped them, reworked them, but I've also reworked our rules of use or policies and procedures for the city of Whitewater. I did that, I don't know, 10 years ago.
Okay.
Can I just ask something real quick?
Yeah.
So just by a show of hands, how many people just, I'm assuming everyone has producers they'll accept programming from, but who has equipment that or facilities in your building where you let producers use? Okay.
Okay, and
So
Sun
what-
Prairie. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So most everyone,
If somebody wanted to use our equipment.
oh, yeah, because some places only will say, okay, I'll take your program that's finished and there's no equipment. So, it kind of depends, some policies will deal with just the channel time and others will be equipment facilities, so I was just wondering.
So-
I think ultimately, though, that's really a matter of look at your ordinance, make sure what your ordinance spells out you're adhering to.
So can I ask a quick question though? How many of you could honestly say that if somebody walked into your station, like Alan is talking about, very left views, public access producer, what you would say was, okay, first come, first serve, I'm putting it on my channel. How many of you are really public access in that sense? Janesville?
Well, we put disclaimers, and that's where we ended up.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get going here. I want to, there's two things we want to accomplish here. One is just to emphasize the importance of written policies that not only the staff understand and your users, but also the community at large, and your city officials. And if you have if everyone understands what the rules of the game are and understands how you make decisions, That is going to help you not get into controversial situations because everyone will understand how you work, why you don't take a show off that has a leftist leaning or something like that, and they will then support you when questions come up and such. So the first thing that we really want to get across here today is you need written policies so that your city that approves those policies can back you up when you run into problems with somebody who doesn't like the way you're running your station. You need that support from your city. And then secondly, I want to make sure Mike's got enough time to deal with problem areas. And I want you to feel free to, ask a lot of questions and bring any problems you've had. So that Mike can deal with them. We kind of provided Mike with a starter list of issues that are common. So we'll spend half of the time on that. And Dave and I are going to split this first PowerPoint up that just basically covers what you need to cover in your policies. So there's two main types of community access center, government or educational access, and then public access. Public access is for churches, businesses, people, political groups, nonprofit organizations. Okay, so that's what's on now. Okay,
Yeah, the big one's what's
got it. Okay.
live.
Okay, I'm catching on. Okay, so I'm putting government and educational access together in one group because in those cases, the institution is the producer of the programming. And they determine and control the content of the shows. And they take responsibility for the content. And they hold the copyright. And they set priorities for the use of the facility and the channel based on its mission. And they may allow other producers to use the channel, but it should be according to their mission. And again, they determine the content, they take responsibility. So if somebody complains about a controversial program on a government access channel, it's the city's responsibility to deal with that. It's the city who produces the program. On the other hand, public access is very different in that case, you are simply acting as a facilitator. You are not responsible for the content. It's the particular producer who produces the program who is responsible for the content of the program. And it's very important that if you want to be a public access center, that you do not interfere with content. Because as soon as you do, you are taking responsibility for it, and you do not want that. Because if there is something controversial, a little off color, something that maybe is more political in nature, that your mayor doesn't like, you want to be able to say, hey, it's public access, I facilitate, I have nothing to do with content, take it up with the producer, we're first come, first serve, this is what you signed off on when we promulgated rules and procedures, and this is how we're running it. And again, it's very important that when something like this comes up, that your rules are very well understood so that they go, oh yeah, I get it. We are not responsible, and that's what public access is all about. So it's very important to have rules for that. And again, first come, first serve. You might have rules about technical things, but you should really avoid content-based rules. Because once you get into content-based rules, you really want to continue to leave that public access part of your facility a public forum. Okay. So quickly, who drafts and approves the rules and procedures? Why does your media center need rules and procedures? What should be included in your rules and procedures, and how are they enforced? So who drafts them? So again, for a government or educational access, you should have a committee getting together and have somebody from the school board or the city council, somebody from your city or school management involved, maybe an expert in access management so they can give you some perspective, and representatives of likely users of the channel. Like if you're with a school, you might have some students. If you're with a local government, maybe some department heads. who drafts them? For public access, another committee. This time you bring in the local franchising authority, which would be, your city or your county, some department or staff, or an expert in access management from the whoever is actually going to manage public access. If you have a cable TV commission, a lot of places don't have a cable TV commission anymore, or some sort of access channel board of directors if you're a nonprofit, but some representation from the governance of the public access portion. And then again, stakeholders, community producers, business owners, nonprofit organizations, or whoever will benefit from the access center. Okay, so management. So with public access, this, again, I'm just going over what is public access. You facilitate use by the public. You might train producers to do their own programming. You may assist producers who are responsible for content. And that you should very, very clearly spell out in rules. Because what I've been seeing is that especially because government and public are often shared in the same center, and resources are very small, I think government is getting more and more sensitive about the amount of staff time being spent in helping public access producers produce their own shows. You should really be training people to produce their own shows, giving them the ability to fish as opposed to giving them the fish. I think that's the way you should really, really run, which is kind of going back to original public access. I think some centers have drifted into producing shows for people, but if you do that, be very clear under what conditions you are going to do that. For example, there was one situation where a city council member wanted to do a show on a channel, and they wanted the staff to help him produce the show. Well, as it turns out, the city council member was a prospective candidate for mayor. And the mayor wasn't pleased that the staff was going to help this council member raise his profile. And basically, said, if you want to do a show, you have to find public access producers to, run cameras and all this, the rest of this thing, which is fine. But let's make sure if that council member was going to use public access, and that public access center was routinely helping every single person walk in the door with camera switching, lighting, blah blah blah, and then refused it to that council member, that's a problem. Because now you're treating that person differently. So again, consistency in treatment is huge.
If you're going to do it for one person or one group, you have to do it for everyone. So
Right.
if the client comes in, you're going to have to do it for them too.
Right. So who approves policies and rules? A governing body that oversees the access center and the city council or county board. Again, you should have the highest level of legitimacy possible for your rules and the broadest understanding of the rules possible. So finally, why should you have written rules and procedures? To receive the support of a recognized public governing body, to enable everyone to understand how your facility works, to make it easier for you to make everyday decisions, to treat everyone in a consistent manner, to help you avoid content-based decisions except in situations regarding obscenity and adult content. And those are situations where you're going to have to do some thinking to help you diffuse difficult situations. And then finally, they should be available as a printed document and on the Media Center's website. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave at this point. What should be included in the rules and procedures? You want to take that over?
Yeah, I'm a little bit of an angle, but I think I got it okay.
Okay.
And just let me know when you want to switch off again. Mm-hmm. So I used to work at Mana Community Media in Milwaukee for about 19 years, and our rules had everything that you're going to see here. they should spell out just about everything you do. You know, not only about your services, your staff, your board of directors, if you have a board of directors, your facilities, and your mission statement. What is your mission? Responsibilities of the facility and channel users. So, you know, how often can people check out the equipment? That's a big thing because, you know, generally you just can't go to a center, check out equipment and never turn in a show, correct? Right? Otherwise you're using the equipment for personal use, which is prohibited because it's free. So we had a rule at MATA that you were allowed to check out the portable camera up to 4 times per program, and you'd have 20 hours of editing to complete the program. After that, you'd need what's called a variance in order to maybe get one more camera checkout or one more edit session. And that was at my discretion, because it wouldn't have to be approved. I could say, well, no, you've exceeded it. You're gonna have to show me where you're at before you do anything else. And as far as what Mary said with how far can staff go as far as helping someone, you don't want to get in a situation where it looks like nepotism or your staff is preferential to one group versus another group. We had a lot of different religions that used MATA, so there was that factor. So my take was everyone was trained the same way. They had a training outline, and then maybe after training they'd get a little bit more one-on-one support, but after that they're still struggling, then we require them to take the workshop over again, the training. Okay, next slide. Okay, so what should be included? You know, how do you become an active member? How do you become certified? You just don't walk in the door and start checking out the equipment, right? Orientation for new members. We did orientation, which was an hour. That didn't really go over the rules. We just said, okay, we'd give people a tour of the facility, showed them the equipment, gave a broad overview as far as what people could do and basically couldn't do. You know, it was non-commercial. You can't use the equipment or facilities for personal use. Membership fees, class fees, if you have that. Resident versus non-resident. We went both ways on that, where originally you had to be a local resident in the city of Milwaukee. And then later we adopted someone outside of the franchise area. They could be a member at a higher fee, like twice the membership level. And also people that just wanted to sponsor a program, let's say they say, well, I don't want to produce a program, I already have it from my church, I just want you to play it. It was still required that they take out a membership or at least go through producer's class so they sign the statement of compliance saying they agree to abide by the rules and procedures. Because they're taking responsibilities for the program. You're not. You're not responsible for the program. You don't have any editorial control. You're a conduit. Just, you know, the program's passing through you. You can't make any changes. And use of the facilities by minors, because minors don't have a legal liability, their parents do. So you should have some sort of guardian signature on the statement of compliance. Okay, you want to go ahead and go? Some facilities have more resources than others. You know, you have field equipment, editing equipment, studio time, maybe a mobile production van. Who can reserve the equipment? So if you have a group of producers all producing one program, can anyone in that group make the reservation for the program? Or maybe you should designate it where one person is selected as the producer and only that one person can reserve the equipment, and that one person is the only one that can sign off on the forms to submit the program for cablecast. How long can you use the equipment for? Damage to the equipment or someone loses something, how do you handle that? And that came up you know, occasionally, not all that often, but it came up, and you'd have to have policies to address that. And then storage of, you know, like hard drives or other things. In the past, we used to give out the 3/4-inch videotape. We'd loan that to producers to record on because that's something you just couldn't buy in a store. And then as we got into digital media, we would either have people buy their own hard drive, or we could lend out a hard drive for someone to edit on. But then we would get that back. So they had an option. Want to go ahead and...
Yeah, I'm there.
So submitting a program for the channel, like I said, whoever does that, that person's saying that they're taking liability for the program. You do not pre-screen programs, otherwise that could be deemed prior restraint. So if you're handed a program, you're not going to preview the program before it goes out over the air or over the channel. You take the program, if it complies to everything, you schedule it according to first come, first serve. So if they ask for 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday, and if that time slot's available, you're obligated to air it at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday. That's just how public access works. Now, you should have some standards in place as far as how long the program will air, how many programs can they play at once. I originally came from Nebraska, and there were no policies that the Cable Advisory Board had at that time. It was just basically, oh, come in, drop off a program, and the cable company will play it. So we had some people that took advantage of things. We had one person that had 20 hours a week where he was on TV, and he submitted 5 different programs. And basically it was just like a selfie. He set a camera up on himself and recorded for an hour. And it was actually a more popular show, but he monopolized the channel because he got there first. He was the first one to request time, so he had all the 10 o'clock times booked up. No one else could get it. There were no policies in place to have someone else come in to get the time slot. As far as, you know, he would still keep that time slot until he no longer wanted it. So you don't want someone to monopolize the channel or the equipment. So there needs to be some sort of limitation. Technical standards, I've had programs given to me where it's like, I can't play this not because of content, but because the technical standards are so bad because of a audio buzz, the video is non-viewable, you know, we're not a radio station, we're a TV station. But you just can't pull that out of your head. You have to have some sort of policies in writing to say, you know, the audio level must be at least, you know, minus 30 dB. Video signal has to be at least, you know, 40 IRE, you know, as far as if you're looking through it through a vector scope. Crew, you know, do crew need to be certified and trained? If they're using your equipment, I'd make sure they're certified and trained. Station bumpers, differences between access, differences in access between residents and non-residents. You know, do non-residents get access to the equipment? Well, basically, if they're a member, they would have equal privileges as long as they're an active member.
Yeah, there might be some difference in access to the channel, you know, and yeah, there's flex in all of this.
And then just last thing on this slide, are you going to allow a series? Now, we had series for either 6 months or 12 months, and a series would be a contract. Let's say a church program would be the most common example. Let's say a church says, I want to have a 10 a.m. Sunday morning time slot forever. Well, once again, you really can't do that because that would be, you know, once again, allowing someone to monopolize the channel. But you could say, well, we have series. So if you want to block 10 a.m. on Saturday, you can fill out the series contract and you can have 10 o'clock on Sunday mornings for 6 months or a year. But then if someone else comes in and asks for the same time, you may get bumped. And then there should be a list of criteria as far as, okay, what would it take to bump someone from their time if they previously held the time slot? So we did it as after 2 consecutive contracts, if someone new came in and wanted that time, that new person would have priority over the older person. What can producers talk about or do? It's basically a public forum. You know, it's a soapbox. Is what public access started as. Now, the sponsorship, underwriting, in-kind donations, and advertising.
Don't go too far into that.
Right,
So we'll
and that
have-
varies from station to station,
Yeah.
so that's something you really have to decide. Adult content can be moved, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's something called a safe harbor. And a safe harbor kind of goes, it only deals with indecency, not obscenity, because obscenity is against the law. But indecency, if it's really indecent or adult nature, you can move that to, say, after 10 o'clock at night. And maybe before 6 a.m. in the morning. That dates back to, what, George Carlson, 7 dirty words. So, but you have to define what you consider adult content or indecent. And it has to do with community standards. Like I said, no production for obscenity. Producer owns the copyright of the program. You do not own it. So if you want to use that program for promotional purposes, you need to have that spelled out in your policy. Otherwise, you could be violating the producer's rights. An explanation of what copyright and fair use is and talent releases, just an overall general explanation to producers so they at least have some sort of guideline to go by. And it's always good to provide forms for people, for instance, at talent releases, and we'll have some of those uploaded. Now with rules, if someone doesn't follow the rules, there's got to be penalties that people would be subject to, because otherwise how do you enforce it? The rules should stipulate what the penalties are, what sort of restrictions might be imposed. They should have an appeal process. So for instance, at MATA, we had 2 different types of penalties. We had a verbal warning, well actually 3, a verbal warning, written warning, and suspension. So if a person's membership's suspended, they can't come in to use the facility or air their program until their membership is reactivated. So usually for the first time it would be for 3 months, then if they did it again, 6 months, and then a year, and then it would be a permanent suspension, which unfortunately we had to do like once or twice. Changes, you'll notice that as you implement your rules and procedures, it's eventually going to change, just like Alan said. That all of a sudden, hey, there's something that came up, we need to kind of tweak our rules. But keep in mind, you shouldn't tweak it just for one person. Because whenever you change a rule, it's for everyone. So you just can't single it out and say, we don't want this one person doing this, so we're going to write a rule to prevent that one person. Because when you write that rule, it's going to affect everyone. And as far as enforcement, you got to do the same thing.
Okay, I'll take back over. So government and education is a little different. You just have to be real clear about what the mission of your channel is. Are you going to bring in imported programming? And then really it's a matter of priority. What are the priorities for this channel? What does your mayor want? What does your city council want? And that should be developed in conjunction with, the powers that be. So you might decide, you're going to allocate staff, number 1, to council meetings, secondly, to standing committee meetings. Priority 3 is request by the mayor. But you have to figure out what your priorities are, because there's going to be a lot of competing demands in a city or an educational setting. So again, if you're going to serve departments, how are you going to allocate resources? Are you going to give sort of a certain amount of staff time to each department? Are you going to say each department gets to do a PSA with you? Or, you've got to figure out some way to be fair. And how much are you going to get involved with internal use, AV? Because a lot of cities end up using our facility or our resources to help them with internal training sessions and such, so how much are you gonna go in that direction? Will you loan your equipment to departments for their use? And are you going to be a little broader than just strictly government stuff? So are you going to just decide to say, anything that the city government partially funds, we will also cover, for example? You can do something like that. So events out in the city, maybe co-sponsored with a nonprofit, that kind of stuff. And if you have a combined channel and you're doing more than one type of access, you really have to figure out how you're going to share your staff time, facilities, and channel time. So what portion is going to be P, what portion is going to be G, what days maybe are you going to have government programming on your channel? You know, what equipment does government get to use versus what public uses, that kind of stuff. And then finally, I'm just going to like fly through this because we're really running out of time. But, and what we can do is we can put this document into MediaFire. But this, the last section here is just sort of like a checklist of what you should think about having on in your rules. So I'm just going to let you read this.
And we'll upload examples of rules from other centers so you can get a feel for what other people are doing, along with different forms that they use for equipment checkout and requests for airtime and things like that.
But, you know, so this sort of gives you sort of an outline of the kinds of things you might want to consider putting in your rules. So they're necessary to operate any community media center. They address concerns that might arise with producer staff and use of facilities. A good set of rules helps the center run smoothly and takes the guesswork out of day-to-day operations. And when approved by your city or county board, your operating rules will have legitimacy and weight. So that's it. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
Okay. Well, again, thanks for having me. I printed out some of my slides, and they're in the back by the camera crew. And don't worry about the PowerPoint. I think I'll skip that. And there's slides back there if you would like some slides to take with you. But really, just to kind of follow up on what we were saying, I think it's important to do two things when you have takeaways here. One is to designate what access channels you have, and if you have a hybrid channel, like Mary was saying, identify, when is it a government channel and when is it a public access channel. And then secondly, develop or update your written policies. And so you should have written policies for your public access and your government access and educational access, okay? And part of the reason for that is that there's different standards for a public access rules and procedures versus the government access. Does that make sense? You want to separate that. When you're, as you know, when you're operating an access channel, you can get into all sorts of fun and crazy situations, right? And maybe you can share some of them with us. But one, I just kind of went through and kind of identified some kind of common policies that we run across, and sometimes where we run across some various issues. So one is advertising and political speech. And so I think with advertising, you need to figure out whether or not advertising is actually allowed on your access channel. I would suggest that under the Cable Act, probably all the PEG channels are really viewed as non-commercial in nature, and meaning that there wouldn't be commercials necessarily run. But that doesn't mean that you can't have sponsorships of programs. So when I think of sponsorships, I kind of think of PBS. So if you watch PBS programming and you see sponsorships, this program brought to you by the law firm of Bradley, Berkman, Hagen, and Herbst, for example. That's completely allowed. So, identifying what kind of sponsorships are allowed and the process of getting them is helpful, I think, in having in your policies. Political ads, again, go to advertisement. Are they allowed, period? But if you did take political ads, it's probably important to understand if there's any political reporting requirements that might be required by the FCC or other places. There may be. There's for sure requirements of cable operators to keep a political file of all the political ads that go out on their channel, and if you're showing political ads, they might want to know what that is. So I would address whether or not you're going to accept political ads. And then probably the more fun area of political speech is just the situation where the mayor has a city show on your access channel, and maybe candidates for the mayor's office, as it's getting closer and closer to election time, think it's unfair and think that they should have equal time as the mayor to talk about different shows. So addressing when current office holders are on TV on your channel, or when candidates are on TV for your channel, can be helpful to avoid those problems when you get close to election time. It's a contested election and people are getting upset about people being on the access channel. You can also address whether your organization will do something on behalf of candidates. So some access channels will do candidate profiles, for example, maybe a 5-minute candidate profile on each candidate running for office in your city, and you can address that in your policies as well. Sometimes you'll hear about equal time rules, and a candidate or a mayor will ask for, or a city council person, whoever it is, will be asking for equal time, and they'll say, well, Sally was on TV for a half hour with her show, now I should be on TV for a half hour on the government access channel. And you can address that in advance by having something in your policies about when these people are on. But if people are asking for equal time and saying that the equal time rules apply, equal time rules don't apply to an access channel. Equal time rules apply to broadcast stations, not cablecast stations, which is what we are. But having those political speech rules in place in your policies, I think, are very, very helpful. Sometimes people will have, and I think this was mentioned earlier, is what is your policy on retaining programs? And that's, your policies is a good place to identify that. You may also have a separate records retention policy where PEG programming might be part of, but it's not a bad idea to have your PEG policies and your retention policies to jive. And when you're recording these meetings, are these the official record of the meetings? Just kind of know what it is that your city's doing there. Duplication policies. Kind of sounds silly, but I think it's important actually to address how to provide duplications of programming to the public in advance, so that maybe there's something crazy happened at your council meeting, and news agencies want a copy of the council meeting. Have those fees set, the process to request those duplications, and how do they bring in their own media now, or do they bring in? No one brings in a tape, I don't think, anymore. But how is that going to be transferred, that programming? And public viewing is another thing that you could allow as well. If somebody wants to come in and see a past program, you can set up a public viewing in your policies. Not a bad idea. Editing programming can be fun. So maybe you've seen this situation where something happens at a council meeting, and there's some regret perhaps after the council meeting's over that this certain thing happened. We want to cut out 5 minutes, either wherever it is in the program. As staff, you may feel a lot of pressure by whoever's asking for that editing to happen. But if you address it in your policies that, our public meetings are gonna go gavel to gavel. And whatever happens, happens. We're not editing the program. We, in one of the cable commissions that I represent, we've had some candidates for office come to the public comment section or right at the beginning of the meeting. And really, the sole purpose of them coming was to take political shots at one of the commission directors who happened to be on the council that they were looking to get on. And there was some discussion about whether or not we should not cablecast that part of the public comment. We'll just cut them out. But they had policies in place that it was, that it was gavel to gavel. So, and by the way, the person that they were coming to criticize ended up becoming mayor of the city, so it didn't work. Okay, but it's important to have those policies in place. A grievance process, I think we mentioned. It's nice to have a very succinct grievance process. So if somebody thinks that the rules have been violated, or if we think the rules have been violated, what's the process that we follow, and what are the consequences of violating the rules? I think program priorities was probably mentioned as well, and I think that makes a lot of sense with the public. Usually it's first come, first serve, but I've also seen situations where there's been series programming, like regular series programming, and so much so that there was kind of debate about I want 7 o'clock and I want whatever hour in prime time, and there was enough programmers that this particular franchising authority decided they would create a lottery for those time slots. And so there wasn't the guy that had 7 o'clock forever. They, every year, every 6 months, or whatever it was, they had to go back through this lottery process, and you'd get 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever it was.
I think we had a policy too where no more than 50% of programming could be series in a certain time block, so it wouldn't just all be series. So.
Yep. And your government access channel can also identify where it wants its priorities, right? It can be emergency information and public meetings, and then kind of go on from there. And then controversial programming. We talked about maybe distasteful programming, and I think your policies can perhaps require some self-reporting of, kind of adult content type of programming, and then identify when that type of programming might be played. It's not obscene, the obscene stuff is not protected and can be prohibited. It's not protected speech. So again, the takeaways are, designate your access channel so you know when, what channel you're dealing with, and know that the rules of the road are a little bit different for government educational access versus public access. And then prepare your written policies, whether they're all together with, maybe 2 or 3 channels, depending on how many you have, or just one, but then identify again where they're segregated. And with that, I'm kind of happy to answer any questions with the group.
I might have missed this, but when you talked about making policies for how long you keep archives of school board, village board, things like that, we could set a policy for a number of years, 7 years, but is there something above that that is telling us, no, you need to do it 10 years?
Not that I'm aware of. Are you aware of
Those
any?
are allowable to determine locally.
Yeah, I'm not aware of. Mike, are you aware of any?
I think it varies state by state as to whether or not a recording of a public meeting is an official public record.
Mm-hmm.
I know in Minnesota it is not.
Right, you would have to
Right.
designate it specially.
Right. So typically, a unit of government has a record, would have a responsibility for retainment of records of meeting actions, right? So official minutes. And I think there was actually a court case about this in Minnesota, or some administrative ruling that basically said that the videotape of the event was not the public record of the meeting.
Could it be subject to open record requests?
Oh,
Well, that ends up being the crux,
Yeah,
right,
the crux
right.
of the matter, right? Is whether or not it's an open record request, and then, but regardless of that, the idea of having a record retention schedule is essential,
Yes.
right? So I'm not sure what the status is in Wisconsin. And I don't know if there's been a determination as by the League of Municipalities, Mary,
Yeah, I think
it
your
was-
point, it's very well taken. I think it is a state level statute, and I feel like there's been even legislation floating around, maybe adjusting that recently, so we should find out about that and see what that
But
is.
it may well be like something that has been sussed out by the municipal league as well, so that.
Totally,
that is
yep,
submitted
yeah,
itself with.
perfect.
In California, for example, the Brown Act has caused all sorts of issues with record retention, because they've come up with a different interpretation of the video. So it's a state-by-state thing, so I would trust Mary's story.
Yeah.
I'd probably suggest, communicate with your city clerk through an email, so you
Yes.
get some kind of record of it, and get their input, because me looking back years and years ago, our city clerk ended up saying VHS tapes, you can keep them every 3 years, we can end up recycling them and reusing them for city council meetings. Once we already had, minutes taken of set meetings, so that was a policy way back then. At this point in time, we burn it on DVD, we just keep it forever, so.
And one last thought is that if you have a video that's on the internet, that's public and open, and there's no way you can take it back, right? So I think there's been this expectation that somehow putting an open meeting on YouTube means that somehow you get to control it through copyright, but typically it's not the case, and you can't control it once it gets out on an open platform like the internet. So for example, the Internet Archive is recording all public internet use around the world. And one of the things that they're doing is taking government video of open meetings. So even though you may think that you can take that thing down, someone else has got a copy of it.
Somewhere.
Right? So I just, you need to be thinking about openness as a way of doing your work.
All right, one last question, because I think we're out of time.
My question was about the advertising. I thought when our state law was changed
Yeah.
that we're allowed, that we can have regular advertising on, isn't that true?
Well, I looked at that,
When that
yeah.
franchise was taken away from the locals by the state, I think. I haven't read it
No,
for a while, but
no.
in there it says that advertising instead of is when whoever ran that through.
I did,
City ordinances will sometimes,
Well, ordinance, city.
they'll end up mimicking whatever is done at state, but you have to make sure your city ordinance is the
well,
same.
also let Mike answer it, because I thought his, he was discussing federal legislation, federal law versus what our state law says. And I thought it was curious that you, yeah, go ahead and answer that.
Well, right, I was looking at the Federal Cable
the
Act,
federal-
and so when the Federal Cable Act discusses PEG channels, it really discusses them as a non-commercial. So I'm not sure exactly, I did peek at the Wisconsin law actually before I came. And I didn't see the express language, but perhaps it's there.
I can't remember.
Well, what they did was, the governor actually crossed out non-commercial. When they defined PEG channels in the act, he actually deleted that in a veto, partial veto,
Okay.
so.
Just,
I'm not sure that would make it a commercial.
yeah.
And-
Well, bottom line, nobody's been successful at utilizing advertising anyway,
Not that much.
and underwriting is a much better way to go at it, I think, so.
Yes,
um,
sponsorships.
Yeah, so it's really just been kind of
Just,
a
just was. trying to
tempest in a
clarify it,
teapot.
that's all.
But you should have outlines as far as what defines
yeah,
the
but-
sponsorship, right?
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, I suspect we're at time, Ross, is that correct? Yeah. So I hope this was helpful, and thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.